Okay, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining. Hopefully, you've all managed to connect okay so far. Everyone that joins will be automatically muted just because this is obviously a WebEx where we'll be going through a slide deck presenting on the Splunk timestamp issue. It will be recorded. Any Q&A can be done through the WebEx question and answer system, which I'll cover off shortly. And yeah, we're going to push on and get started. Quick disclaimer, these are Adarma's conclusions based upon the most recent information available. There's some of our own observations as well, which I will draw out and draw attention to. There is also some chat on the WebEx. If you're having any problems, feel free to reach out and we'll do our best to troubleshoot if we can. But I'm just going to progress through the slide deck and the presentation in a timely manner just so we can get on with it. So this is what we're going to be covering. So we're going to summarize, obviously, the recent discovery of this timestamp issue that Splunk announced over the last couple of weeks. We're going to talk about the problem itself, the root cause, the impact, and trying to check if you are impacted. And then we're going to talk about the recommended solution and also some tactical short-term solutions which can be implemented if need be. I'm going to follow up with any Q&A that's been shared. As I mentioned, the Q&A will be done at the end of the call, but if you would like to ask a question as we go, please do use the WebEx Q&A functionality, which should be within the window that you're currently in, and this should enable you to ask questions. If you make sure they're public questions, it will save people from duplicating them, and we'll try and answer them at the end of the call. So, as Splunk users, this came as a little bit of a surprise. We had a number of emails come out, both as partners and users of Splunk ourselves. And these really circulate around two key challenges, both around timestamp recognition for the Splunk software stack. The most immediate one starts impacting us as soon as the year rolls into 2020 on January 1st. This will happen immediately from 2019 into 2020. The impact is essentially we'll be unable to recognize timestamps that have 2-digit years. And we'll talk about obviously how this impact will reveal itself if you are affected. And then there's actually another issue. This has been less focused on so far in the communication, but it's covered by the same issue. And that is that on September 13th, 2020, as the seconds move from 12:26:39 p.m. UTC. As it rolls over that second, this will also cause an issue, and this is due to epoch time or Unix time, causing it to not recognize timestamps. Both of these have quite significant impact to your data collection and storage, which I'll now cover. Now, before I go into the impact, just a small amount on the root cause. We're not here to really work out why we've got to this place and how they've got through the rigorous testing that Splunk does. But fundamentally, the root cause is some regular expressions that have been poorly implemented, or I guess implemented without the foresight of considering the impact as we roll into next year. As you can see, this is articulated in the table below. There's 4 pieces of configuration within the XML, but these are 2 examples, and you can see from left to right the before and after. And the small difference, what a 2 makes, and this example shows you the 2 time the year when it's displayed with 2 digits, and as you can see, and without going through all the irregular expression, the key component within the brackets essentially means that it's expecting the years to start with a 9, a 0, or a 1, i.e. 2019, 1990, etc., but not expecting it to start with a 2. So this would mean that anything rolling into 2020 onwards would stop being recognized. This, of course, causes a really big issue if you have any data, which we'll now cover. So the impact of this is that any time Splunk has been set to automatically detect the timestamp, i.e. guess, that is when the file in question or the configuration in question is actually used. So datetime.xml is only called when either explicitly articulated within your props.conf configuration, or when you do not articulate the specific time formats that you're looking for within your event data. So Splunk tries to automatically detect it using the regular expressions I just went over. Now, the issue here is, of course, time is a very important construct to Splunk. It creates time-based indexes, and therefore anything falling outside of those of that time may be subject to deletion, i.e. as your bucket rolls. We may have the issue of the timestamp being guessed at by Splunk based on previous event data, therefore incorrectly recording the event time. The retention of data overall could be impacted because buckets can roll based on the oldest and or newest event within that bucket. And obviously the actual search results, i.e. the value you get out of Splunk, is impacted because Splunk by default is going to be looking at that event time as recorded by the system. Once that time has been recognized within Splunk and written to disk, there is no method to correct that timestamp. That is a hard written timestamp within its index, and then you have to re-ingest that data if you want to correct it moving forward. So again, massive impact if this is therefore not resolved before that data is ingested, especially in the larger customers we have and that Splunk has. As far as the impacted Splunk software, this essentially impacts the vast majority of Splunk software stack, essentially anything that is based on the Splunk enterprise binary, or indeed the universal forwarder binary in some cases. So this impacts Splunk Cloud. I'll come back to the on-prem impact. Splunk Cloud will of course be remediating and is in the process of remediating this on all customers' behalf, as Splunk is the responsible party. But everything else under that you're responsible for, as this is on-prem or managed by yourself. So that covers Splunk Lite, Splunk Enterprise, when they're indexes, whether they're clustered or otherwise, heavy forwarders or input data managers, the latter being covered by Splunk Cloud, any search heads, clustered or otherwise, the search head deployers, the deployment servers, cluster masters, and license masters. As all of these are fundamentally based on the Splunk Enterprise binary, all of these are impacted and therefore need to be remediated. And then in Splunk Universal Forwarders, by default, Splunk Universal Forwarders do not do the processing of data or the passing of data to the point they would be impacted. But there are some key situations which for some customers will be edge cases, for others won't be, that will impact you in this way. One is if you have been configured to process structured data, so that covers things like CSV, XML, and JSON type, using the indexed extraction attribute. The other is if you're processing data locally using the forced load local processing setting in props.conf. And then finally, if they're using a modular input, that will often extract the data as part of the modular input, and then it will look at an unknown file type, or sorry, is at risk at finding an unknown file type and having this issue as well, where it defaults back to that datetime XML. So that is the impacted software. Obviously, it's very broad and does cover a lot of the Splunk deployment as far as its software stack. Therefore, the impact, again, is very broad. So this is a search from Splunk Professional Services, very useful, that attempts to look at universal forwarders that may be impacted based on the internal metrics that can be sent by UFs. Not everyone has got this implemented, so it won't work for everyone, but this is being offered out as just a way of trying to assist customers and Splunk users in identifying any universal forwarders that might be impacted. These slides, as these searches, will all be shared on Adarma's tech blog, so don't feel that you need to screenshot this, it will be shared shortly. Secondly, and a really useful way of finding out whether or not the datetime_config has been set within your props.conf. This is a Unix or Linux-based find command, which will grep through any props.conf and ensure that they have a datetime config set. The reason that's important will become clear as we move on to the potential tactical fixes, but essentially if you have a props.conf configured with datetime_config, this will enable you to detect where you may or may not have this attribute, which will help understand which source types might be impacted or are not. So covering some of the recommended long-term solution. As expected, this is fundamentally to upgrade the Splunk binary, update your software in line with Splunk's recommendations. These have been published widely by Splunk. This is also our recommended solution. Fundamentally, you want to be running the latest version of Splunk that is recommended and safe to use. And in this case, any unpatched software is not safe when it comes to your data, and ensuring that that data is, processed and stored, ready for analysis in the right way. And then the other recommended solution, which is more of a best practice, is always ensure that the Magic 6 configuration items in props.conf are configured. If this had been followed for all of your data sources, this bug, this issue would not have impacted your environment due to the fields being adequately defined, and therefore you're not having to rely on Splunk's regular expressions to automatically detect your date and time. However, obviously many people very much need a short-term fix, and so these are both pulled from Splunk and ourselves to try to articulate some short-term tactical fixes that can be put in place to remediate this issue in the short term. It's getting very close to the holiday period, with many organizations having regulatory change freezes put in place or resourcing issues to try and get this change over the line. So at the top, we have, if you add time_format to props.conf for every source type and ensure that you articulate the correct regular expression for that timestamp, this will again force Splunk to use that configuration rather than it defaulting to its automatic detection of time. This will then ensure that its regular expression, which is missing that key 2, which will be skipped. The other option is to replace datetime XML or temporarily replace it as far as precedents within the Splunk app. So Splunk has provided both the app that will help you do this. So if you deploy that app to your environment, it will take precedence in most cases, ensuring that you use the updated and therefore fixed datetime.xml. The other is to actually manually replace that file yourself. So there is again an updated version of datetime.xml that Splunk has validated and tested in distributed environment setups that works. This will, however, lead to the manifest file being out of sync and then for some file integrity warnings. These warnings for this specific file can be ignored as it's a planned change, but it should obviously be remediated once you're able to update the latest version of Splunk software, which will of course include an updated manifest. The final one is essentially modifying datetime XML yourself. So adding that to where need be. This is obviously error prone as it's very manual, but again, if that is the only type of options you're left with due to the time constraints or the resourcing constraints, it is still a valid option tactically to implement a short-term fix. So we've obviously rattled right the way through that. There's probably not a huge amount that those of you that have read all the different posts from Splunk or engaged with Splunk professional services already didn't know, but we did want to cover it. We're now happy to take any questions to ensure that we can try and answer and prepare you best to deal with this, remediating this issue. And as I mentioned, this is going to be recorded and shared for future consumption from those that couldn't attend. And we also have a blog post that is gone live that kind of covers the narrative and shares the slides in detail. So yeah, if anyone has any questions, please do ask them either in the chat or in the Q&A. And if not, then feel free to check out our tech blog where the slides will be found and reach out to us if you need any help. And I will be online now for about the next 3 or 4 minutes as I wait for any questions to come in. If not, then I'll stop the recording and close down the session. Thank you for your time.